He did an enormous amount. I mean, look, Helms was the man who brought the first round of NATO expansion, bringing former Warsaw Pact countries into the NATO alliance, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. And they turned out to be some of the best allies the United States had after September 11, 2001. They were the first ones to offer up troops when all the Europeans were wringing old Europe, as Don Rumsfeld called it, was wringing its hands. New Europe, those countries were saying, tell us where to send our troops, we're with you. So that was, I think, visionary. He reformed the United Nations. He got them to reduce the bureaucracy by over 1,000 people and cut the U.S. arrears. And he became the first senator in American history ever to address the UN Security Council. He reformed the State Department. Ronald Reagan used to say there's nothing so near eternal life as a temporary government agency. Well, Helms shut down 2 government agencies, which was unprecedented at the time, the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency and the U.S. Information Agency, and reformed the State Department. And he killed the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. He stopped the Clinton administration from negotiating a new ABM treaty, which would have prevented us from having ballistic missile defenses. Can you imagine, with North Korea now on the verge of having a missile that can hit the United States, if we didn't have any kind of missile defense? So Helms was a visionary there. He stopped us from joining the International Criminal Court. So he accomplished a lot of things, and he stopped a lot of bad things from happening as well. Donald Trump was elected because he was fighting for the forgotten Americans who the establishments of both political parties had overlooked and were ignoring, and they wanted to get their voices heard. Jesse Helms was fighting for the forgotten Americans long before Donald Trump even thought about running for office. I mean, he was fighting for the people. I remember he had telling us a story on one of his campaigns where he had been out in eastern North Carolina, and he had said something that caused the media to swarm down on on a rally he was having at a farm somewhere, and he said, "If you want to know who the reporters are, they're the ones with shoes on." I mean, he was fighting for the forgotten Americans who were overlooked by the political elites in Washington long before Donald Trump came along, and so he'd be very proud of the fact that President Trump is fighting for those people. In the Republican Party, the orthodoxy was free trade. We had more free trade agreements and all the rest of it, and Helms was the one saying, well, what about manufacturing workers here in North Carolina who are losing their jobs because of these bad trade agreements? And now Donald Trump has renegotiated NAFTA. He's cracking down on China. Jesse Helms was the lonely voice in the Senate fighting against China getting permanent most favored nation status and entry in the WTO. It's turned out to be a disaster. China is an economic predator that is stealing our intellectual property and forcing American businesses to hand over proprietary information and closing its markets off to us in dozens of sectors. And so Trump is pushing back and saying, no, we're going to put tariffs on you unless you open up your markets to American manufacturing goods. And Jesse Helms would be cheering for him because he was saying it 20 years ago. So there's so many areas, and then there's other areas of foreign policy that I think he would be very happy with. He would be thrilled that Donald Trump is cracking down on the socialist dictatorship in Venezuela the way he has and supporting the Democratic opposition. He'd be thrilled that he was reversing Obama's disastrous opening to Cuba and the Castro regime over there. He'd be thrilled that we're cracking down on the International Criminal Court, and because the International Criminal Court, which Helms predicted, is opening an investigation into U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan. So they kept saying, we're never going to prosecute Americans, we're not interested, we just want to go after the dictators. They want to start investigating us for war crimes. And Jesse Helms warned about it, and Donald Trump has basically declared war on the International Criminal Court, saying you're not going to get to do that. So there's so many areas where Jesse Helms would be enormously pleased with the way things are going on foreign policy.